Good afternoon. It's great to be here. And my name is Peter Poolsaar. I'm from Toronto, and I'm an IT consultant. Blue Catalyst is a consultancy company, and we focus on innovation, currently working on smart buildings. And as an IT consultant, I'm inherently curious, and I have some great guests here to interrogate on their views on smart cities. So hopefully we'll have an enjoyable half hour. So just a couple of fun facts. I'm from Toronto. Toronto is the fourth largest city in North America. Probably didn't know that. 6 million people in the Greater Toronto area. It's growing by, I heard, 200,000 a year. If I don't go downtown for 6 weeks, there's a new building, and I don't know where it came from. Don't recognize it. So smart cities is a very important topic to us. It's attracted the attention of Google with their Alphabet division for Sidewalk Labs. So they're doing some interesting things there. They're not represented here, maybe next year. But for now, joining me is a balanced panel. And Joseph Way from Skychee Ventures, VC, Tomas Türk from the city of Tallinn, and Taavi Tammiste from Sifr for a developer's point of view. So I'll just very quickly allow them to introduce themselves, and then we'll get right into it. Joseph.
Hi, I'm Joseph Way. Actually, I'm from the original Silicon Valley, not the finest. I'm happy to be here to talk a little bit about smart city. So actually, it's not really about from my venture background, because we, Skychee Ventures actually invest in, focus on IoT and cross-section IoT and artificial intelligence and machine learning type of startups. But I have another role as a volunteer for an organization called the Institute for Electrical and Electronics Engineer, IEEE. So some of your double E students probably would recognize that organization. And that's the organization that put out a lot of industry standards. So today, when you have a phone that can connect to Wi-Fi, and if you look at the back of your Wi-Fi router, you will see the standard is called IEEE 802.11. It might be -AG, AN, depending on the variations. So smart cities, I think the definition is going to be like blind man touching parts of an elephant. So it depends on what part you touch. But I think standardization is going to be an important part where the massive adoption of the advantage of a smart city can take advantage of an industry standard, will be able to allow mass adoption of some of the technology and benefit a lot of the users. Thank you.
Great. Taavi?
So hello, everybody. First of all, I have to say this is one of the most comfortable panels I've been on. This couch is fantastic. So my name is Taavi Tammiste. I'm CEO and co-founder of an artificial intelligence development company called Sifr. We work with all types of different things, including applications for smart cities. I'm a strong believer that the word smart is an equivalent thing to artificial intelligence. So hopefully we can delve into that a bit as well and see what makes these cities actually smart.
And Tomas.
Hello, everyone. My name is Toomas. I am the first ever Chief of Innovation in a city government in Tallinn here. My duty is to be the leader for the smart city innovative projects and programs, and also one of the gatekeepers for startups if they want to interact with the city government. And I think that truly that there is no such a thing as a stupid city. So every city is smart. And I really believe that here in Tallinn you will see quite many good things about that. So thank you.
Great. So we have a really good balanced viewpoint here. And I'd like to open the discussion, and we'll just go down the line again here. But smart city is a buzzword, a jargon word. If we can unpack that a little bit, in your point of view, what is a smart city? Joseph.
So my early statement is depending how you define a smart city and how is the implementation, what you want to drive. There's no dumb city anymore. I mean, everything is smart now. The thing is how smart and what kind of connectivity. I think that's where it depends on the overall, I think the big initiative, because a lot of the smart city is driven because one of the major, I think, driving factor is about traffic. Pollution, right? Combustion engine. So that's why countries such as Germany, China have already put out a mandate that they have to, they will no longer allow combustion engine cars to be run by 2025, 2030. Traffic congestion is also a waste of productivity time. So we lose a lot of time in just wasted in the traffic. So depending what is critical to be solved in the city. I think that's how the definition is going to be defined. It's going to be by city by city.
It's interesting. There's, I was at Tomas's earlier discussion. It sort of ended off with this thing. In innovation, a lot of times it's like, don't fall in love with the solution, fall in love with the problem. And defining those problems that that a smart city will solve will help us understand a little bit more. So I know you have a point of view on that, Taavi.
Yeah, so there's a lot of sort of things that makes a smart city smart. In my view, you need to have some critical infrastructure underneath for it to happen. So connectivity is one thing. So if you want to make take data from the sensors to make intelligence decisions, understand where people move to do traffic detection, all these types of things, you need to have a connectivity. You need to have a single standard so that whenever a city government or any other sort of entity buys into a smart solution, they know it's future-proof and it doesn't go away, and it also has a reasonable cost to it. One of the things that I see, for example, in the IoT world is that there's not really a clearly defined standard yet, and that raises a lot of sort of worries in terms of entities who are buying this type of equipment. And that's something that definitely needs to be solved. And this is actually the data that a smart city would need to generate in order to make people's lives better.
So we heard about communications, we heard about IoT, then maybe some of the problems kinds of things that would you'd look to a smart city to solve.
Yeah, that's true that technology is the answer to every question, but what was the question? So you need to really understand what are the problems, and if we talk, for example, about developing the smart cities, and the development and the innovation starts from very, very small things. And to understand that, and then whose interest is there, because for the cities, there are so many stakeholders to take into account, and there are so many solutions on the market, so it's kind of a cooperation, and for me, the smart city states actually, let's say, kind of intelligent community, a know-how that is brought together and developed together.
So there's different constituents and actors that make up a city, right? There's the citizens, there's the visitors, and this day and age, it's all about experience. Now, I know there's environmental aspects as well, so maybe we talk a little bit about the kind of experience that a smart city might engender that we do. Maybe start from the other end this way.
Yes, sustainability is a very hot topic, and it's not about future. It should happen right now. So how it actually can change is that the way we actually commute, for example, the way we use the transport. So if we just want to be like self-sustainable, zero CO2 city, then it really means that we need to skip some of the cars perhaps one day, or just to use another ways. But it also very much is based on this technology and the knowing of different data, different information that is coming in real time. And this is what most of the cities are planning for, the smart city activities. They build these huge networks, they use data analytics, etc. So, but first coming to this problem, what is actually the issue to be solved? This is something to be very much interacted with the citizens or the businesses, or in some cases also it's very important to interact with investors to say that what they actually expect from the cities.
So interesting, sort of leading into the topic of data, and data unrefined isn't really useful, but then you start doing things like analytics. So we have some machine learning and expertise here. So Taavi, how would you sort of take that data? What do you need to make a city smart? What would you do with it? What kind of possibilities could we see out of this?
I think in a general, in software development so far, we've had a lot of emphasis on things like user experience. So in terms of smart cities, I think we need to start looking at citizen experience. What that basically means is smart cities need to go through the same fundamental change that feature phones went when the first iPhone came out. So it's an existential citizen experience change. That's something that can only be done through analytics of data and understanding where citizens are, what they do, what the interactions of citizens look like, etc. And this has to be done in a sort of a GDPR and sort of privacy secure way as well, at least here in Europe. So these are pretty tough tasks, and that's why I believe that no city, other than maybe New York in the States, has achieved that, and there's a lot to go.
Okay, so we talked to some of the motivators. We're going to get into the barriers, but I think the other key thing that came out was communication. And I know myself when I travel, until I get a data connection, I'm kind of lost. So there's communication, the state of things today, and what's it like today, and where does it need to go? Maybe Joseph.
Well, I remember when I first, having to travel for business like 25, 30 years ago. Avis, Hertz Rental, give you a map.
Yeah.
Literally, sometimes you have to pull over, look at the map, and find it out. And now we just take granted for our GPS. I don't know how many people use Waze,
Good example.
Mapping system versus Google Map or other type of map, because Waze actually in the Silicon Valley, where actually it's an Israeli company, but it started in Silicon Valley, and it used live data from users. So there are certain data that it's much more real time. So we trust that data a lot more because commute. Going back to traffic problem. I mean, I've traveled to 9 countries last year, and so far I will have at least traveled to 4 countries by next week. Every major metropolitan city all have traffic issues, and so how do people figure it out? And I think that's where the data comes in, and also with artificial intelligence and machine learning, because sometimes human cannot. Sometimes when we figure out shortcuts to our workplace because we travel there every day and then we travel different paths and we learn it and keep it in here. But nowadays with machine learning, basically the machine can actually do better prediction because we don't know if there's when you look at the traffic, if there's an accident. That's why Waze is much more powerful than Google Maps because they actually keep a lot of live data from the actual user on the road, so you get much more accurate information. So I think that's going forward with 5G, and we'll talk a little bit of that later on, because now 5G is going to be 100 times faster than 4G. So autonomous driving must be able to, 5G must be there enough for autonomous driving to be able to be successful to operate in those type of
So we see some emerging technologies. I'm not sure we'll have time to explore all those, but autonomous driving, 5G. Some of the things that come up, and I know in Toronto it's a big discussion right now with the Sidewalk Labs, is data privacy. You're collecting all this information on people. You're Google. What are you doing with it? And that's the biggest fight I think they're fighting right now is data privacy. And I wonder, maybe from a city perspective, how do you address that?
Yeah, so when we talk about this, using this city e-services, and of course we are benefiting also what is done here in Estonian country level. So it's the same security level that you can have on using the e-Estonia services are the same for the local services. But when it comes to the collecting of this data and then of course this European level GDPR topics are covering most of that, but at the same time it's also that we can somehow work together with global companies, like let's say for example the operational information real time about the Tallinn traffic is also visible in a Waze. So these are the things that we can actually do. About the privacy and about this private data collection, so the thing is, I don't think that the cities really want to go into that. It's what you see on a global level when countries cities will talk about the smart city. When there is a democracy, then they tend to talk a lot about these issues when there is not that much democracy available. Of course, there are these face recognitions and collecting data from streets and etc. etc. So it's a big issue. So there are different perspectives.
So from maybe a developer's perspective, you have all this identifiable data. but that's not what you want. You want something else. How do you go about?
If I could maybe challenge that and ask you a question about that, is that so you don't really want to get into private data, and I get that. There's a lot of legal hassles around that. But don't you think you could give the citizens the possibility to give consent to provide you with private data so you can build better services on top of that?
Yeah, that's a very good challenge. So this is one of the things, yes. But at the same time, to just take, for example, a picture of the car and there are people inside and their faces, and then just use it for sending out the tickets because there were misuse of bus lines, for example. This is legally not accepted at the moment.
Because why I'm trying to sort of push this topic a little bit is that this is not all the case in all the cities, but for example in Estonia, in order to make services better with things like machine learning, we need a lot of data. Estonia is 1.3 million people. So in order to provide the machine learning algorithms with, or the AI with enough data, the data sets either have to be very big, which we don't have, or really accurate and really precise, which means going into private data. So this is really important that we would need to get access to that, or at least consensual access.
Or maybe there are one day city services for the citizens, and as we are protecting the citizens in a physical world, and let's say that, for example, Tallinn is also quite a safe city, also has a clean air, it's really important to keep this level also perhaps in a digital world. So that's a challenge for the city as well.
It's an interesting concept in Toronto, this data issues being resolved by giving it to a third party for custody. So it becomes more of a not owned by a for-profit company, but it's available to all sort of equally. So that kind of gets into the role of the different entities in there. And we can talk about the government. We talked about the president this morning was telling us how they sort of move barriers out of the way. For sure, legislation, I think there's things to do that. So from your own perspectives, in terms of, I guess, in the investor perspectives or in developers or in cities, you know, what roles do you feel that are in enabling a smart city?
So in the US, as you probably know, we really don't want the government to be involved in private business. But for smart city and some these bigger scale projects, and you look at what's happening with cities in China and cities in Singapore, and it has to be somehow a balance between government involvement, because from a venture perspective, now typical US venture, now our fund is 10 years. So we're looking for an exit in less than 10 years. And a lot of these investments, you probably won't be able to see the return after 10 years. I think there has to be a balance between some of the government involvement in terms of rules and regulation, checks and balances, and also in terms of incentive. For example, why we have 300,000 order for Tesla Model 3, because that's a $7,000 rebate, and Tesla say, oh, you can buy the Model 3 for $30,000. So basically, it's the cost of a regular combustion engine car. So they got a huge backlog of orders. Now, why Tesla stock is not really going up again is now that incentive is only for the first 250,000 cars for the Tesla build, and that incentive goes away. So Tesla, to continue the demand, they said, oh, we'll subsidize and pay.
Was this a Tesla?
Tesla.
Tesla offered that incentive or rebate?
Yeah, so now the investor is looking at, well, if Tesla, you're going to take $7,000 off your profit to subsidize, to continue the demand. How are you going to make money, right? And that's why Tesla stock recently has been kind of like hovering and not continue to go up, like what he's done since the IPO days.
Okay, so a key ingredient is going to be incentives and rebates. I know there's certain countries had green.
Now, let me just add to one more point, right? So under Obama administration, there were two $500 million investment. One is to in the Bay Area. One is to a solar company called Solyndra, crash, right? And the other $500 million was to Tesla to get them started. And also, I think the plant that they took over called NUMMI, which was a joint venture between General Motors and Toyota. It was a car factory, but they, so the existing infrastructure, I think, helped, because there was another EV car company called Fisker, which was in LA. And why they failed was they weren't able to take advantage of some of these infrastructure incentive to be able. And Tesla actually repaid that $500 million back to the government early.
So there's nuances here. There's every sort of opportunities and roles and things like that. Okay, so rebates. We talked about standards a little bit before. Is there anything else, other roles of like entrepreneurs and engineers might offer to Smart City?
Well, I mean, for development and for development of intelligent services, one very important thing is education. So the level of education in cities needs to be really high so that you can produce engineers that develop and adopt new technologies really quickly. All across the globe, there's a problem with data scientists. There's a lack of data scientists and sort of higher university level education. But on the other side, I think as I'm an AI guy, I always get back to this: the access to data, open data sets, the government's and the city's ability to actually give you access to data in a simple and easy way, which is very often, sometimes a city says that, yeah, here's our data, please use it. And this is not in Estonia. Please use it, but if you start getting access to it, it's too hard to actually start getting meaningful value from it. So these are all very important things.
Actually, when we talked preparing for this thing, you said an interesting thing about citizens, what their role is. There's something about being willing to change or. Yeah,
I mean that's a thing in general, is that if you start creating services that are cognitive in the sense that it start predicting the way people behave, they will also start behaving in that specific way. Was that what you meant?
There's something, be willing and open to embrace these changes.
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean that's because I live in Estonia, we have such an open tech community, and sort of people are very open to new solutions. But if you go down to the Central Europe and Germany, for example, those countries might not be able to, or might not be as willing to adopt new technologies as we are, for example.
And then in terms of maybe the city or some other element, the role?
Yeah, I guess the most important topic is to become more open, to open the doors and to be open-minded, to have the discussion and cooperation outside. And yeah, basically this is the most important topic for the local governments.
Okay, so we're close to our end of our time, and I wanted to have sort of an open-ended kind of thing. So pick your favorite thing. But I'm wondering what your perspective would be on trends or predictions. A 1 year that you see coming on, 3 years, and 10 years blue sky if you could see kind of things. Or perhaps there's some sort of advice that you'd just like to get out to the audience. We have investors, we have startups. What are the key problems if you solve this thing I'd be happy with? So maybe we just go down the line and we'll just use that to close ourselves.
1 year, I don't think that we can actually see a lot of changes in terms of smart cities, but depending on, I think, specific country and cities initiative, and they will drive wherever the initiative. And personally, I think the traffic problem is going to be a major problem that most of the cities are trying to solve. 3 years, because Verizon CEO actually already announced that in the fall, Verizon will launch 5G services in selective cities in the US, and that's going to be interesting because we can always figure out ways to use up more bandwidth. It's just the nature of the business. Like YouTube, right? Before YouTube, we just didn't think about why we need high-speed video, and now people don't even listen to music; they stream music, right? 10 years down the road, I think autonomous driving will have some form in being deployed in various cities because, quite frankly, the younger generation don't like to own cars. They don't like to have debt, right? For me, it's just like driving in traffic is not, no. So even if you get a very fancy car, Tesla, and you got stuck in traffic, how interesting is it? I'd rather just have, out here boat or somebody drive it, and eventually you don't really need a driver. So I think you can see some certain amount of implementation of that type of autonomous cars.
It's kind of my favorite use case too, is once you start getting mobility as a service, autonomous cars, electrified vehicles. Modern cities have been built around the internal combustion engine, private ownership. What happens to garages? What happens to some of the multi-lane highways? What happens to gas stations? You can start seeing things maybe in 10 years there.
And one more thing is just, there's a startup actually in Silicon Valley. I mean, they actually thinking about flying drones that will fit inside a garage. So basically, it's like a car. You roll up to your driveway, and then it would lift up and then start going.
We got
because
drones.
there's a city down in Florida. I cannot remember the name of the city, but everybody owns a plane, and that's a main. Basically, everybody comes out at the driveway, and there's a main airstrip, and then you can just take off from your plane.
Okay, Taavi?
Yeah, so it's hard to put these into sort of timeline context. I completely agree with the 10 years and self-driving cars. It's kind of difficult to see that happening beforehand. But I think one of the interesting things is it's the smartness of cities won't happen as a big bang. I also don't see it happening at the same rate across the world. So some cities, mostly that are larger, will have an advantage. Because if we're talking about the same thing as 5G, even when we were implementing 4G, the business case really wasn't there. So cities that are implementing 5G connectivity need to be large enough to validate that business case, which also means that they will have an advantage in the future. So small cities like Tallinn, we need to come up with some really innovative stuff to catch up and to be, even more bleeding edge than them.
So I'll put the last question a little bit more on the spot here, Tomas. It's like, in your role as the head of innovation for the city of Tallinn, what can you see concretely happening in a year, 3 years, and then blue sky 10 years?
I think the answer is very simple. Just follow us, see what happens here in the finest Bay area, in the metropolitan area of Helsinki and Tallinn, and just follow the next Latitude conference agendas. You will see that what really happens here.
Okay, so we have time after this at the Ask Me Anything area, so it's not an interactive here. So if you want to join us out to the front, I think we've run out of our time and love to talk about this more. I learned tons. I love these kinds of things, so thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, and let's keep talking.
Thank you.
Thank you.